Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Under the Microscope show. I'm Michael Young. Thanking you very much for joining us. This evening we're going to be having an interview with the opposition leader, Dr. Barry Jagdeo, who is no stranger to this show. Dr. Jagdeo, welcome again to the Under the Microscope show. I know it's been a long time since we last spoke. When we last spoke, you were doing lots of things in the area of climate change internationally and within the local environment, and you had now returned to the political scene, so to speak. This interview of yours is probably going to update you on all of the activities that the opposition leader would have been up to, and we're also going to get some insight into some of the issues that are affecting the people of Guyana. First of all, how have you been since we last spoke?
Well, I've been well. As you pointed out, I have participated in various meetings abroad, but it's not true that I've been only focused abroad.
Yes.
I've had a series of meetings in many parts of the country, in Region 6, in Region 5, in Region 2, talking to thousands of people, listening to their concerns, their trepidations about the future, their worry about the rice industry, about the sugar industry, which provides most of the employment in these areas. They're worried, they're extremely worried about the future of our country. And from all the signals we're getting from the current government, it seems as though attention is not being paid to the critical issues which will affect people's well-being. That is job creation, activities that provide money in people's pocket, income for the country. They seem to be more focused, as I said in the budget speech, on trips abroad, on things that are expenditure-oriented, not in terms of receiving income. So yes, I have spent a lot of time abroad doing some international work, but I've also spent quite a bit of time talking to thousands of people, literally. Those who have come to my office, the businessmen and people who even supported APNU in the last elections, and thousands of ordinary people across the country.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the work that you would have been doing on the international scene. Dr. Jagdeo, I understand that you would have been part of a series of meetings in New York around the UN General Assembly, and you dealt with several issues related to climate change. Update us on some of the discussions that are taking place globally with respect to climate change and global warming and all of these other issues which affect the future of the world and not just small economies like Guyana.
Sure. Well, you're absolutely right. I spent some time in the last month having these meetings. And next week I'll be in Russia.
Yes.
I have to speak there again. And what we are trying to do is to rebuild the momentum that we had pre-Copenhagen to get a new agreement, a successor agreement to the Kyoto Protocol that has very ambitious targets and would be internationally binding. Because only if we succeed in getting such an agreement, then we have a reasonable chance of avoiding catastrophic climate change.
Yes.
And so a lot of the meetings that I've had have focused largely on how addressing climate change is not just a cost to countries and to economies, but how it can also be used to stimulate economies, how it can bring in income for people, how it could become the new economy in the world, the same way that the Industrial Revolution was, the dot-com boom was to many, many parts of the world. And so a lot of work has been focused on that sort of thing. Advocacy and showing up the evidence and talking to people about the need for us to raise the level of ambition for the current agreement in Paris, for the current meeting in Paris. Unfortunately, a lot of the pledges that are on the table cannot assure us of meeting that if combined and implemented would not be enough to keep global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level. And that is required if we're to have a 50% chance of avoiding catastrophic climate change.
Would you deem these meetings successful, given some of the commitments that you would have pointed out would have been made by different countries? Do you believe that you're getting closer, world leaders, to achieving that overall target? Or is it still
what I've seen for Paris at least, because since Copenhagen,
Yes.
when we had a great deal of political interest in the issue of an agreement, a global agreement, and when that failed, we saw a decline in political interest. And we saw a retreat by many countries in the industrialized world. They largely citing the global economic crisis as the reason for the retreat. And we had pointed out at that time that if the crisis was basically bringing some sort of discomfort or causing serious harm to people's livelihood and their income, an issue of climate change is an existential threat. You still have to keep paying attention to it. So we have seen a pickup in the level of political interest for Paris, but that is not mirrored by deep enough pledges of emission cuts that would be required to avert or to avert catastrophic climate change, or to achieve the targets that the UNFCCC and the UN scientific body has determined is necessary.
At home, sir, under your tenure, we would have seen lots of interest being paid to climate change. We had the low carbon development strategy. When Donald Ramotar was president, there was also heightened attention paid to climate change and its impact on small developing countries like Guyana and within the CARICOM. There's a new government in place, and we have a new Minister of Governance who I understand has responsibility for climate change and energy in these matters. Are you satisfied with the way the government is responding with their plans and projects that aim to deal and combat climate change, to make contributions at the regional and international level? I hear they're talking about the establishment of a sovereign wealth fund. They're talking about creating green jobs within the economy, and they're talking about making Guyana a country that can again lead the battle for climate change within the region. Is this all talk, or has the government so far demonstrated serious interest in pursuing that course?
Well, first of all, I'm extremely pleased that they have finally, after 6 months, identified who is responsible. And I'm still not sure he is actually responsible for climate change. That is Trotman.
Yes.
I have looked at many of the policy positions of the government, and I shouldn't say many. The few policy pronouncements of the government, and many of them seem contradictory and at sea. They seem to be lost about where we have to go as a country. So there has been very little talk about the low carbon development strategy, maybe because they think it was developed under the PPP.
Yes.
If they emphasize that, the low carbon development strategy, people would think that it's continuity of policy, but they have not presented an alternative to the low carbon development strategy, which was technically based and had, I do not want to go into all the details,
yes,
because I can speak for an hour on the low carbon development strategy, but it had a clear goal, it had clear policies, it had identified sources of funding for policies and programs that would deliver particular outcomes, that is, cut our emission level and at the same time keep our economy growing and prosperous.
Yes.
So we have heard in principle that they are supportive of a green economy, but yet the agreement that brought in a significant, or brings in a significant amount of money, the Norwegian agreement, to achieve this green economy, there's very little attention being paid to it. And the single initiative that would have made a huge difference in decarbonizing Guyana, that is the Amila hydropower, they have moved away from it. They said it's criminal to implement it. I have asked several questions about the Amila Falls hydropower project that they have refused to answer. And up to a week ago, I issued another statement on it, that let's do a fact-based assessment. Let's have a debate on the Amila Falls so that the public will determine what is criminal. Because by not going ahead with the Amila Falls, we're denying this country some $850 million of investments, which could add as much as 2 percentage points to GDP, that will save at least $2 billion US dollars, or 400 billion Guyana dollars in 20 years. Jordan said that it's criminal to go ahead with Amila Falls because it will cost us $2.6 billion to buy the power in 20 years. I asked him one question, a simple question that they have refused to give an answer to. What will it cost us, a GPL, to generate the same amount of power? And it will cost us at least $2 billion US dollars more in the 20 years to generate the same amount of power. But they have shelved, moved away from the biggest project that could have decarbonized our economy. I've seen recently them talking about these, the intended nationally determined contributions, that is INDCs, which are the pledges to Paris. And frankly speaking, it's not creative. It lacks creativity. It's just like pulling together some old things that we have done in the past. And then I hear this loose talk about sovereign wealth fund.
Yes, which is...
And Trotman seems to be in a high talking about the sovereign wealth fund, but I'm not sure that he understands the purpose of the sovereign wealth fund. The sovereign wealth fund, first of all, can only be financed if you have a large unintended influx of foreign currency. We are not there yet. In fact, our foreign currency earnings are falling. So I presume that they're thinking about oil proceeds in the future. The idea is that this money has to be sterilized to prevent the Dutch disease, or something called Dutch disease, which is the appreciation of the exchange rate, which can kill off other sectors, kill their export competitiveness. That's one. Two, it has to, the money has to be invested in a fund of that nature to ensure long-term flows to the country. So if you have bad years, then you can use some of the money to bolster budgetary spending, etc. But you can't be too loose about it, because then it would violate the purpose of the fund, etc., etc. I've heard someone from Kaichor News called me, a reporter, and said they plan to introduce a carbon tax to finance the fund. Now, a carbon tax is not required for countries like ours. Our target, our per capita emission is very low compared to the developed countries. Developed countries are contemplating two moves to achieve their targets, either a carbon tax or a cap and trade system. Here in Guyana, we cannot do it. We should not do it. Because if we do it, what we will do, we'll make our exports less competitive at a time when our economy is sliding. because the cost of electricity will go up, the cost of anything that has fossil fuel related inputs will go up if we introduce a carbon tax. So I think he hears all these concepts, but he's not linking them together in a framework. And our framework was the low carbon development strategy with clear aims and the targets, which they should have done through the INDCs now, have to be linked to the low carbon development strategy. And then you have to have consistent programs to implement them. We seem to have lost our way in this regard. And unfortunately, we are losing the international profile that we had, that is Guyana taking the lead on many of these issues.
Maybe this is not a priority for the new government, would you say so? And that maybe their priority may be pursuing oil or other avenues that they think can boost the economy.
Yes, but you can pursue the oil. We pursue the oil. ExxonMobil came here not under APNU.
Yes.
It came under the PPP, and they're coming back to them talking about long list of investors just lining up to come to Guyana when they win. I haven't seen one major investor, but Guyana Goldfield that the president opened, ExxonMobil, CGX, the other, about 3 other gold mining operations here of a big nature.
Yes.
The malls, the one that is under construction now, all of these things have come to Guyana under the PPP. So we could have progressed in this regard. We could have developed an oil and gas industry, but still have an important global profile on climate change, because climate change affects everyone, and we have to take strong mitigation action and even stronger adaptation action.
Sir, some recent comments you've made with respect to the Guyana-Venezuela border issue has sparked lots of controversy and lots of talk after an online news agency would have published statements which said that you wanted to give up the Orinoco River to Venezuela so as to get some leeway on the issue or the controversy with Guyana. Could you set the record straight once and for all? What was what was the PPP thinking at that point in time? And is this something new, that proposal that the PPP proffered?
Yeah, well, it was at a press conference, and what I said is that I've been bombarded by reporters to comment on issues relating to the border. And I was very reluctant to do so, given that these things, you need to have a strong national position. I did not want to say anything that would undermine the national position. That's the first point. Then the president spoke in Parliament, and I said, I'm very happy that he updated the country about what was taking place in the discussions between our team and the Secretary General's office. However, in light of some very strong statements about what route we wanted to go in both borders with Suriname and Venezuela, I would have liked to raise some concerns with the government. And that route he had spoken about was the juridical route. But because the promise committee that the president had said he will set up, and I heard them saying, I didn't formally indicate that I'm willing to participate, but I've spoken no less than 20 times about our willingness to participate in a committee of that nature. So I lamented the fact that in the absence of that committee, I was forced to raise some issues publicly that I would have liked to raise in the committee and to seek clarification on them. What I did was I raised rhetorical issues because I had considered, I'd been president for over 12 years. We had explored, in fact, I should say I have explored several options internally. And for those who think, because you have some people now who think you shouldn't explore things even internally. Well, let me say to them that I was never that sort of president. And I will never be that sort of opposition leader. I believe in doing homework. I believe in studying every single thing available to us. I took the time and effort to do that, options available to us, but without making a determination as to which one will be formally put at the negotiating table. But a president needs to know all the solutions available
Yes.
to his country, and to look through them from the perspective of advantages and disadvantages. So we had done that. In fact, I had done that. And so I said one of the options that there was a view that we studied internally was, should we give this a channel to Venezuela, and to the Atlantic, without compromising the 1899 award. So no change, no compromise on the land territory. This was one of the views, not that we proposed it, offered it, that I studied. The argument in favor of that was that it keeps intact the 1899 award. So that award is sacred, it keeps it intact.
Yes.
Since we have not demarcated the maritime boundary with Venezuela as yet, and Venezuela is not part of the International Treaty on the Law of the Sea, that at some point in time, even if we settle through the juridical route the land issue and we may keep the 1899 award intact, we'd still have to come back to the table to demarcate the maritime boundary,
Yes.
like we had to do with Suriname. So this proposal was saying that you by offering that, you will get both, keep the 1899 award intact and at the same time settle the demarcation of our maritime boundary. Now that was one view, one of the options. Mm-hmm. It was not proposed to Venezuela, but it was studied internally. I see a lot of people commenting on this as though a president must be a dummy and not study anything. Uh-huh. Well, I can't be that. Mm-hmm. And then I said, I'm not opposed per se to the juridical route, because we had looked at that too when I was there. What I wanted rhetorically for the government to answer were these questions. And I knew the answers to the questions, but this is for public consumption, to show that we are thinking through the issue before we box ourselves rigidly into single positions. So I said, if the committee was set up, the questions that I would have sought answers to was, is this option available to the Secretary General under the Charter? The answer is clearly yes. So if it is yes, will the Secretary General be prepared to propose this? Okay? So as part of their solution to both parties. If this does not happen, are we prepared to go unilaterally to the juridical route? Can we go unilaterally? You know, because it requires, I know it requires consent if the Secretary General does not propose it. These are valid questions the government has to answer. Because if we say only the juridical route and nothing else, and maybe that is a good position now, and we can't talk to each other, and the Secretary General does not propose the juridical route, and we can't get Venezuela to agree to it, where does that leave us? And these are very, very important issues to be considered. And let me say to all of those who've been critical, because it was distorted. The person from iNews asked me, where was this? And I said, oh, the channel would have been near the Orinoco. He thought it was the Essequibo. And I said, near the Orinoco. And the next thing I saw is a news report from the iNews saying that I had offered to give up the Orinoco. The Orinoco doesn't belong to us. How can I offer to give it up?
Yes.
And then when we complained about it, they quickly amended it to say riverine area. I'd offered to give up riverine area.
But you would have been criticized on from another standpoint that you were willing to give up territory, whether land or sea that belonged to Guyana.
No. The sea is not, the maritime boundary is not settled.
Yes, you said that.
Maritime boundary is not settled, but not land. Because imagine if they're critical of me for doing this. I have always said the 1899 award is sacred, no compromise on this. Mr. Hoyt had said, let's keep an open mind on this. Imagine if I had said that when he came back from Venezuela and was questioned by Starbuck News, David Icaris. He said, let's keep an open mind. He was talking about land. And I didn't even say, I said this, and we had not proposed it. Now, they said, the juridical route, I had offered it to Venezuela. Now, I'm not, as I said before, opposed to the juridical route,
yes,
but it is working together. When presidents meet, and I suspect that the people who are saying this have never sat in the chair as president. When they meet, there are lots of things you discuss. Every time I sit in a meeting with another president, I don't skin my teeth with them or make jokes. That's left for social engagements. I always try to forward or move forward on national interests. So when Chavez came here, and he said, this is an imperialist imposition, the border issue. And I recall when that's what he was saying. I recall as a young officer, when we were trained, we were told that, this Guyana is our enemy, etc. Having said that, I recall going to the United Nations and then walking over to see Chavez at their embassy and taking with me a ton of documents from the 60s showing the CIA involvement in Guyana and the British Secret Service. And I said to him, here are documents that support your view. Now, as an internationalist and as a person who says he believes in integration and justice, you have an obligation now to drop this border claim, because you yourself have said it is an imperialist imposition. Here I'm providing for the evidence of it. You have a duty to do that. I did not speak much about that, but I was pushing for him to drop the claim based on his own statement. I would have explored probably the juridical route, saying, if we can't settle this bilaterally or through the UN process, maybe it's time we consider going this route. Let's go to the ICJ and get an opinion as to, they will have to prove Venezuela that the 1899 award, based on their contention, is now valid. And they would have a difficult time. In fact, it's impossible for them to prove that. So these issues have to be taken in context. I've been very careful about speaking on these issues because I do not want to undermine our national position.
But have we achieved progress over the last 4 months?
I don't want to comment on that because these issues take time. But let me say one thing about my legacy. No border has been settled definitively in the post-independence period. all of these agreements predate independence. The agreement with the Dutch and the British
Yes.
in relation to our border with Suriname, the 1899 award between the United States and the UK. The only settled border that was settled definitively was done in my tenure. I've never compromised national interests. Not an inch of Guyanese land has been given up. And in fact, I've settled, I'm the only president, so all of those who are talking, who settled definitively one of our boundaries in his tenure in office.
Yes.
And so I will be happy to defend my record on this issue. But I know in defending it, the national position may lose out. And I'm not prepared to do that.
Now, sir, let's talk a little bit about some other local matters. Let's talk about the Ghana Elections Commission. There's lots of discussion happening with respect to GCOM and its preparedness for local government elections. The PPP itself has said a few things, expressed a few concerns that they have about GCOM and its employment and some of its practices, given its own experiences at the last election, the May 11 polls. What is your general position on the Ghana Elections Commission and their readiness for local government elections?
Well, the party has given us a report, and they have grave misgivings about the preparedness of GCOM to conduct local government elections. And we're very, very unhappy that the government, having rushed through the bill through Parliament, suspended the standing orders to get it all passed in a single day with a promise that we would have local government elections by December,
yes,
has now shifted into their timeline. So those are two things. We have been arguing for changes at GCOM. And the first is to give confidence about the future. So a dual system of voting with enhanced biometrics. We prefer retina scan for every Guyanese individual. You vote on the machine, so you walk up to the machine, you look into it, it scans your retina, you vote there, it issues you with a slip of paper, you check whether that is accurate for which party you voted, and then you put that in the box. So you have a dual system. You can count on the machine, and you can count from the box.
Yes.
What this does, it takes out the presiding officers, something that we've always had a huge concern about, how presiding officers are selected. It takes them out of the equation. No longer will they issue the ballot, but you only get to vote based on your own biometrics. The last elections, in fact, was the first one after a long time that we could not get a list of the presiding officers. GCOM refused to give us a list of the presiding officers. And Mr. Serge Bali supported the APNU commissioners for that to happen. Turned out that many of them were very partisan. So if we move to this new system, then we can avoid that happening. Then we've said they have to have, if you hire people on the merits, if you hire staff on the merit, the imbalance that we see in GCOM staff, the ethnic imbalance, wouldn't be so glaring, because you can't say 95% of the people of one race that they're the only ones who can pass the test. You know, we have seen many instances of how the test was conducted. Some people, their applications were thrown away. People of an Indo-Guyanese origin, they're from the university, finished university and failed the test. You know, a simple test that a person with secondary education can pass, yet they failed the test. There's no transparency.
But is all of that deliberate, sir?
And we think it's deliberate, and that's why we're urging for a transparent system for hiring people. You know, public ads, an impartial body to administer the interviews and the tests, etc. And then we're calling for cleaning up the list and some other things. So these are some changes we are advocating
but
for.
Has GCOM been very accommodative of the suggestions
well,
and changes?
The discussions have started.
Yes.
And I'm not going to, prejudge that.
Yes.
But there are some other worries that have been raised recently by many of our supporters. The question they ask me when I go across the country is, do you think that we could have another free and fair election in Guyana? Given GCOM's role in the last elections, and secondly, what they have already been hearing. They believe, and this was brought to my attention by many of our leading members of parliament and party supporters, that already in the GRO, there have been some attempts to change the staff with a sinister purpose. That why would you give Mr. Felix a department and make it into a ministry? Because he has a small department which has now been transformed into a ministry of citizenship. That the idea is to start issuing fake birth certificates over time, every year, so that if that happens, when GCOM does the registration process, even if the process is fair there, people who are not supposed to be on the electoral roll will be on the electoral roll. And that there is a sinister plan surrounding this about the registration and the issuance of birth certificates and fake birth certificates and multiple birth certificates, and that a system is being prepared to do that. And this goes back to the past, because that was one of the big concerns of the past. And the second concern that was brought to my attention was the recruitment into the Army. 300 new recruits into the Army.
Yes.
And I was told that about half of those soldiers are coming in not from the career stream, but from a political stream. And reference was made back to the past, the 70s, when a lot of young political activists, many of them from the YSM at that time, the youth arm of the PNC, were placed in the Army. Many of them got accelerated promotion to the top. And then the Army, the professionalism of the Army got subsumed by political leadership. And that Mr. Granger himself at that time was he was reporting to the office of the president.
Yes.
So that is being replicated once again, that a significant number of the new recruits, not all of them, yes. Some are coming in as regular soldiers, applying, getting their interviews, they're yes. going in, that some are being put in there. Political people are being planted once again into the Army, and this will subvert the professionalism of the Army, something we have fought to restore the professionalism of the Army and the police.
But Mr. Jagdu, do you share that view? Because you said those are the views of your supporters and some members within your circle at Parliament. Do you believe that, given your own experience as President of Guyana and given your own history, being a public servant and all of these things, your readings and all of these things, that this could possibly be
these have been
again?
Brought to my attention.
Yes.
We have to explore them. Now, if it turns out that I was misled, but I do not think the people who spoke with me would mislead me.
Yes.
Then no harm is done to the country. if it's not true. But if it is true, then there is a bigger, sinister plot that even if you get the reforms at GCOM, then you could have other influences that could lead to us not having free and fair elections in the future.
Yes.
And so, given the position, the nature of this government, the very partisan way in which it has exercised power, I will not put it past them to have a few, because they have quite a few military people in there who may be tasked with this objective to do this sort of thing. And so we have to investigate it and expose it and draw international attention to it,
yes,
if it turns out to be true.
Let's talk a little bit, sir, about the economy. You're an economist. We have had lots of persons within the private sector commission in Guyana, that's the formal body, at the level of ordinary small businesses and shops complain about business being bad in the country since the last elections. Some people are complaining that there's not a lot of spending taking place in the economy and there's a lot of reluctance on the part of consumers to invest in new businesses. Is this a concern shared by the PPP? Because the Minister of Finance, this is Mr. Jordan, says that things will get better in the country by Christmas.
Well, he has not only said that, he has said that there is no problem in the economy.
Yes.
And he is urging us to stop bad-mouthing the economy. Now,
I see you smiling.
yeah, I think Jordan takes these things personally. Our criticism of what's happening, the lack of focus of the government, the clueless economic policy that it is pursuing, this focus on ratios and speeches without focusing on the real sector, what's taking place, the real sector, will harm us irreparably in the future. So Jordan has to by now been talking to people, ordinary people across this country. And if you talk to the miners, you will find that they have reduced their activities significantly, by as much as 50%. Mm-hmm. The rice industry is in crisis. So I heard them talking about how much more rice they're exporting. So if they're doing all of this more exports, why is it that people are receiving $1,500 to $2,000 per bag per paddy when they were getting $3,000, $3,500 in the past? And of course, they were promised $9,000. They said sugar is in crisis. They themselves are saying sugar is in crisis. Retail trade has dropped. If you talk to the people who are selling vehicles, you talk to the bankers, he should be talking to the bankers to find out how many people are not servicing their loans. The housing industry has come to a standstill. You know, people talk to the real estate agents. He will find out that the economy is in serious trouble. And they're doing absolutely nothing to try to fix it. Now they can do things. They can help the rice industry. I've put forward a 7-point plan to help the rice industry, you know, to remove the taxes on inputs, on fuel, to help with a subvention to the industry so people can get some seed paddy and fertilizer, to suspend all payments on their lease, you know, to look for more remunerative markets, etc., etc. Suspend the export levy. You can do lots of things. I've suggested that we can drop the royalty rate for the miners now, because we did it in the past. I did it when I was president, that when the industry had hard times, we reduced the royalty on a sliding scale for local people. And we can do that again. We can suspend payments for the lease payments they're paying for the land.
Yes.
You know, we can do lots of things. Not just sit and complain about people bad-mouthing the economy. That will not fix it. But even more worrying to me is the only thing that is saving us now, I think, is the low fuel prices, because there is not a big demand for foreign currency in this regard, to pay for fuel, because the supply of foreign currency has come down, economic activities have shrunk, so the demand for foreign currency has shrunk too, including the demand for importation of fuel. But what happens if that changes? You're going to have major problems with the exchange rate unless you support the activities that generate foreign currency. And to compound that now, we have seen this new bill that the Private Sector Commission has written so strongly about. Not that we are opposed to giving the powers to our statutory bodies, like the GRA, etc. But these powers have to be exercised in a framework of accountability, privacy, and no vindictiveness. And people have to be clear about what they're being investigated for. So we don't want to go back to a police state. So I'm in favor of the agencies, GRA, having these powers, but the powers must be exercised within a framework. And it cannot be done at the capricious, the caprices of anyone in GRA or a politician. And we know how vindictive this government is.
Yes.
That they will go after people based on their accounts. And this is not politicians, they'll go after anybody, the business community.
Yes.
And so that is generating more fear. And the worst thing can happen if it generates a crisis and people start taking their money from the banking system, poses problems to the banks, and then if they start switching into foreign currency, it poses problems for the exchange rate, and then we could very well have more capital flight. These are the issues that Jordan should be addressing now.
But how do you explain his posture? How do you explain his response and the government's position that things are not bad and that this economy will pick up as soon as they probably deliver their next budget, or next year, or by Christmas when business gets booming? It seems as though the government is not sharing the same view of the ordinary man or
exactly. Well, that's a problem. They live in a cocoon. They live in a cocoon. The focus has been on looking after things for themselves. So big wages and salary increase. And I'm so disappointed that we will not be able to debate that motion in Parliament on wages and salaries. And I'm so disappointed we'll not be able to debate the motion that we put where ministers, every member of Parliament would have to declare the last 10 years of their tax payments.
Yes. Because
in those debates, people would have seen the callous nature of this government, and that this talk of transparency is a big sham. It is a sham, it's a facade. Why would you be scared of a debate on wages and salaries increase, or releasing your tax records, and you are arguing for greater transparency?
Yes.
And what they're doing is unheard of across the world. The legislature comes to a standstill because a couple of ministers have to travel. If you say that in other countries, they would think you're an alien.
Yes.
That the legislature, the highest lawmaking body in the country, has to come to a standstill, can't conduct its business because two ministers have to go to a conference and they can't tell you what their position at the conference will be, nor what benefit it will bring to the country, but the entire legislature. I suspect that they're scared of the debates. And from what I'm told, that these motions could lapse. And I think that they may try to drag the sitting of the Parliament out so that the motions would lapse and we wouldn't be able to debate them. And further, why should they be afraid to do what I've suggested to the President, that we can do jointly. I said to him, let us go to the parliament jointly, pass a law where all members of parliament and all ministers and all ex-presidents will declare publicly, make it known to the public, all their assets, particularly assets abroad, because they said they can't track those assets that they have, their bank accounts, if they own properties, if they own shares, etc., everything abroad, and that if they fail to make accurate declarations, then they can go to prison for 5 years. Let's put that in the law. Why would they oppose that if you talk about transparency?
Yes.
So the first, I saw their code of conduct, and the first line on the code of conduct that ministers have to be accountable to people for their actions, and they must be responsive to questions. The code of conduct says that. Imagine you're not even responsive to the questions of the parliamentary opposition, questions that are in parliament.
Yes.
How would you be accountable to people for your actions? And so the whole code of conduct too, it's a farce. It's a farce. The reality is very different. And so that is why I'm saying, even Mr. Jordan, they're far divorced from what people think on the ground. Yes. Go out there, they promise to create lots of jobs. You know, where are the plans for creating the jobs? The call center that is opening up now, that would generate about 500 jobs in Robb Street, that was built under the PPP. It's the only big thing. The call center in Linden that had 80 persons working, that was built under the PPP, it got closed. You know, this is where are these job creating endeavors? And even in the city cleanup, which is a good thing, but it's an expenditure. It's a good thing, but there's no transparency in the procurement. Who is getting all these contracts? Who is getting the contracts? Who are being hired? From our information, they are close. They're people who are very close to APNU. And a lot of this payback for election,
yes,
election money that was given, already they've started. You know, people are getting contracts without tender now, without any tender. And they had a conference about how to improve procurement. And there's no transparency about procurement. How could you say that and you had a $40 million contract given to Christopher Ram, single source, no public tender? It is very hollow, very, very hollow, what they're talking about, about improving transparency.
As we're in our last 2 minutes, sir, given all that would have taken place since the May 11th elections, do you believe that the government has indicated to people its true nature and what Guyanese can expect probably over the next 5 years, 3 years, given their own postures, their responses to the media and questions with respect to the president's inauguration, and all of these other things, spending and these other things that would have affected people not at a national level but at a grassroots level within their communities?
Yeah. It seems as though we can only assess where we're going on the basis of these early indications. And clearly, they don't have a focus on the important things. That is to keep the country growing and income coming in. They're very focused on spending. At some stage, the money we left, the $160-something billion in recurrent revenue, and the $30 billion in the semi-autonomous agencies, and the close to $650 million in the central bank, would disappear if you don't focus on sources of generating new wealth. They're banking on oil, but I'm not even sure that we'd be in the next 5 years we will actually be pumping oil, because with the price of oil where it is now, a lot of exploration money has dried up. And if it's more costly than the $40 a barrel now to take the oil out there, then it would never get taken out. So that's an early indication that in the future we will have lots of problems, because They have already started indicating they want to borrow against the oil, they will borrow to do a number of things, etc. That is what happened in the past that led to our debt stock was 7.5 times GDP. And we were using 94% of revenue to service debt when we got into office. I think we can go back there with all of its attendant complications for people's lives. The next thing is there seems to be a very partisan move, an assault in PPP areas. Take, for example, Bath Settlement. GPL goes in and removes the street lights there. The city council in Georgetown doesn't pay for street lights, GPL. In fact, they owe a lot to GPL for street lights. But you haven't seen a crew taking out the lights in the city. They go to Bath Settlement, they take out the lights from people. Then the minister says, we can't afford it. But we can't afford a few lights in Bath Settlement, but we can afford a 50% increase for ministerial salary, which is probably close to what they pay for the water subsidy for all pensioners that they took away. They can afford that, can afford these big trips abroad, but they can't do that. One trip by a minister now could probably pay for all the lights in Bath Settlement for a single year, for a year. But they can't afford that. But again, look at Linden. We are subsidizing electricity to the homes there, but you can't afford it for a few street lights here. GPL has now accumulated over $5 billion because the fall in fuel prices, they have not passed through the benefits to people.
Yes.
They should have passed through the benefits to people. And the PUC needs to act on this because they're just accumulating this large sum of money there because the fuel prices are low now. They can afford it. They can afford to drop the electricity prices. So that's not true. Then we saw in Hope Estate, they changed the board, and the farmers there who produce wealth in our country to income, their lease fee, I was told, has moved now, the land rental fee, from $2,500 per acre now to $25,000 per acre. So, you know, close to 1,000% increase, 900% increase. Mm-hmm. So this is the kind of thing. The rice industry is told, no help for you. Sugar is told, the sugar workers are told, we can't start negotiating on wages and salaries. If we had done that when we were in office, in fact, in March, April, if we don't start the negotiations on wages and salaries, you have big strikes in the industry. And at that time, the strike wasn't political, it was industrial. Now it's November, the negotiations have not started, and Mr. Holder says, oh, the strikes are political.
Yes.
And so the workers need to get an early settlement of the API as well as their wages. Because if you can find a 50% for ministers, then you can do that. Look at the signals they sent to public servants. Apart from the fact saying we had to pay the ministers more, the 50%, so that they not be corrupt. That tells us something, that you're saying the ministers would have been corrupt if you didn't give them the 50%. But what are they saying to public servants? The teachers, the policemen, the nurses, the doctors, the soldiers. They're saying to these people that if you don't get the 50%, you can't be corrupt, because we had to take a 50% increase for ourselves to avoid being corrupt. So you're not getting the 50%, you're getting a 5%, so you can be corrupt. And the public servant salary is not like a base. They're not earning $1.7 million a month like Nagamutu is, or 1.1 for the ministers now.
Yes.
So a lot of these are the early indications. And you know what? It's the arrogance of it. Trotman says, we are considering 100%. We only took 50%. You trust us. We know what's good. It's the arrogance. It is going to Parliament and doing what they want in Parliament, suspending the sitting, doing this. There's no consultation on, even on the climate change issues. Yes. Very little consultation. This is what we can expect from this government. And so we are going to keep pressing in the PPP. We're going to be exposing all of these issues. We're going to be pressing for help to the productive sectors of our economy. We'll push very hard to see, because we want a buoyant economy. We're not going to do like they did, try to ruin the economy by cutting budgetary expenses and blocking initiatives. We want more for our people, whether they're public servants or sugar workers or bauxite workers, wherever they are. Because we're opposition, not for PPP supporters alone, but for Guyana, for all the people. We have to be their voice too. So this is what we plan to do.
Well, thank you very much for joining me on the Under the Microscope show, Dr. Jack Dew. I'm not sure when we'll be able to have another interview, maybe in another few weeks, months. I don't know how long it will take. But thank you very much for sharing your views with us. And thank you very much, viewers, for tuning in this evening. I'm Michael Young. Do have a very good rest of the evening.